Hold on to me. Mafia boss dragged the drowning girl from the stormy sea and refused to release her. The Atlantic Ocean was not in a forgiving mood. A nor'easter had been hammering the coast of Harborview for 16 hours straight, turning the usually picturesque marina into a chaotic cauldron of black water and white foam. Rain slashed sideways, driven by wind that howled like a wounded animal, rattling the reinforced windows of the black SUV parked at the edge of the desolate pier. Inside the vehicle, the air was still and smelling faintly of expensive leather and rain dampness. Nico Romano sat in the rear seat, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, tracking the movement of shadows near the warehouses 300 yards away. He did not look like a man concerned with the weather. He looked like the storm's landlord, waiting to collect rent. Leo Costa, sitting in the driver's seat, tapped the steering wheel with a nervous rhythm. "The visibility is terrible, boss," Leo said, his voice low. "The crew from Black Harbor is late. If they do not show in 5 minutes, we should pull back. This weather is covering a lot of noise, but it is also blinding us." Nico adjusted the cuff of his dark suit jacket. "They will show. Victor Kane does not hire men who are smart enough to come in out of the rain. They are desperate for the route access. Just keep the engine running." Nico's empire was built on precision, on controlling the chaotic elements of the underworld until they ran like a clock. Tonight was supposed to be routine, a simple intimidation play to ensure a smuggling crew understood that the docks belonged to the Romano family, not the upstarts from the south side. But then, the wind shifted, carrying a sound that did not belong to the storm. It was a scream, high, terrified, and human. Nico turned his head sharply, his gaze snapping away from the warehouses and toward the chopping waves of the harbor. A small, sleek yacht was cutting through the water, far too fast for the conditions. It was listing dangerously to the port side, fighting the swells. On the aft deck, illuminated by the erratic sweep of a lighthouse beam, 3 figures were struggling. 2 men in dark rain slickers had a woman pinned between them. She was small, her hair plastered to her face, fighting with a ferocity that surprised Nico. She kicked one man in the shin, causing him to stumble, but the second man grabbed her by the back of her jacket, slamming her against the safety railing. Leo followed Nico's gaze. "What in the hell are they doing?" Leo muttered. "That is one of Kane's pleasure boats." Nico did not answer. He leaned forward, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the door handle. The woman screamed again, a jagged sound that tore through the roar of the ocean. He saw her face for a split second, pale, desperate, eyes wide with a terror that hit Nico in the chest like a physical blow. Then, the men shoved her. They did not just push her, they heaved her over the railing with the intent to discard her. She went over the side, her arms flailing, and disappeared into the churning black abyss of the freezing water. A 4th figure, a man in a light coat, stood near the cabin door of the yacht. He gripped the railing, looking down at where she had vanished, his posture screaming panic. Yet he made no move to throw a life ring. He just watched. "Coward," Nico hissed, a surge of pure, molten rage flooding his veins. The yacht gunned its engines, the bow rising violently as it turned sharply to speed away toward the open sea, leaving nothing behind but a white wake that was quickly swallowed by the storm. "Boss, we need to go." Leo started, putting the car in gear. "That is going to bring the Coast Guard." "Stop the car," Nico ordered, his voice lethal. Leo slammed on the brakes. "Boss," Nico was already moving. He threw the door open, the wind instantly tearing at his clothes, soaking him in seconds. The cold was shocking, a frigid slap that smelled of salt and diesel. He scanned the water, his heart hammering a rhythm he had not felt in years. The waves were 6 feet high, crashing against the pilings. There, 30 feet out, a dark shape broke the surface. A head, an arm. She was fighting, but the current was dragging her toward the concrete pilings of the pier. The water in Harborview was 40 degrees tonight. She had 2 minutes, maybe 3, before her muscles seized and she sank for the last time. Nico did not think. He did not calculate the risk to his reputation, his suit, or his life. He shrugged off his heavy wool coat, letting it drop to the wet pavement, and kicked off his shoes. "Nico!" Leo shouted, scrambling out of the car, horror on his face. "You cannot go in there. The undertow is vicious. Call the boat around to the east ladder," Nico roared over the wind. Then he ran to the edge of the pier and dove. The impact stole the air from his lungs. It was like hitting concrete, followed instantly by a crushing, numbing cold that felt like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. The darkness was absolute. Nico kicked hard, surfacing with a gasp, the salt water burning his eyes. The ocean heaved, lifting him up and then slamming him down into a trough between waves. He oriented himself, spotting the faint splash of white water where he had last seen her. He swam with powerful, desperate strokes, fighting the heavy drag of his clothes. The current was a beast, trying to smash him against the barnacle-encrusted wood of the pier. But Nico swam with the fury of a man who refused to lose anything that night. He saw her. She was barely keeping her head above water, her movements growing sluggish. She went under, a wave crashing over her, and did not come back up immediately. "No," Nico growled, diving under the surface. His hand brushed fabric. He lunged, his fingers tangling in a jacket, and he pulled with all the strength in his shoulders. He broke the surface, hauling her up with him. She coughed violently, a raw, hacking sound, and thrashed in his grip, her survival instinct blind and panicked. "It is me! I have you!" Nico shouted, hooking his arm across her chest to keep her head up. "Stop fighting me!" She went limp, her energy spent. Her head lolled back against his shoulder, her skin radiating an alarming cold even through his soaked shirt. He could hear her ragged breathing, the sound of fluid in her lungs. "Please," she whispered, the words barely audible over the crashing waves. "Please, don't let go." Nico tightened his grip, treading water as a massive swell lifted them. "I have you," he said, his voice rough. "I am not letting go." The sound of a powerful engine cut through the storm. Leo had brought the small Romano speedboat around from the lower dock. The spotlight swept over them, blinding Nico for a second before the boat idled down, pitching violently in the chop. Two of Nico's security team were at the gunwale, reaching down. "Grab his arm," Leo shouted, terror etched on his face. Nico kicked hard, propelling them toward the boat. He lifted the woman first. His men grabbed her jacket and arms, hauling her over the side like a rag doll. Nico grabbed the ladder, his muscles screaming in protest as he pulled his own weight out of the freezing water. He collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air, shivering uncontrollably, but he did not stay down. He scrambled on his hands and knees to where they had laid her. She was curled in a ball, trembling so hard her teeth chattered with a sound like rattling dice. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were wide, fixed on nothing, the pupils blown with shock. Nico shoved his men aside. "Give me the blankets, now!" He grabbed the thick wool blankets Leo threw at him and wrapped them tightly around her, pulling her upright. He sat behind her, pulling her back against his chest to share his body heat. Despite being freezing himself, he grabbed her icy hands, rubbing them vigorously. "Look at me," Nico commanded, leaning his head down so his forehead pressed against hers. She blinked, her eyes struggling to focus on his face. She looked terrified, not just of the ocean, but of everything. "Stay with me," Nico said, his voice fierce, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Do not close your eyes. You fight this. Do you hear me? I cannot," she stammered, her voice shaking. "It is so cold. You can," Nico insisted. He squeezed her hands, his grip bruisingly tight. "I did not pull you out of there just for you to give up on the deck of my boat. Breathe." She stared at him, mesmerized by the intensity in his face. Water dripped from his dark hair onto her cheeks, mingling with the seawater and rain. For a moment, the chaos of the storm faded, leaving only the heat of his anger and the anchor of his presence. She clawed weakly at his wet shirt, her fingers curling into the fabric as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. "I am here," she whispered, her gaze clearing slightly. "Go!" Nico shouted to Leo without looking away from her. "Get us to the clinic, now." The private clinic was a sterile fortress hidden in the wealthy hills of Harborview, owned by the Romano family for situations exactly like this: bullet wounds, stabbings, and things that required discretion. Tonight. It was for a drowning girl, The doctors had taken her immediately. They had stripped her of the wet clothes, wrapped her in heated blankets, and placed her on oxygen to help her lungs clear the fluid. Nico stood in the hallway outside her room. He had refused to leave to get changed, though Leo had managed to bring him a dry set of clothes. He wore black trousers and a dry white shirt now, unbuttoned at the collar, his hair still damp and falling across his forehead. He paced the length of the corridor, his energy frantic. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her falling. He saw the dark water swallowing her. It made him furious. It was a violation. The ocean was his. The city was his. Someone had come into his home and thrown a woman away like garbage, and the disrespect of it made his blood boil. Leo stepped out of the room, closing the door softly. She is stable. Boss, her temperature is coming up. No major internal injuries, just bruising and shock. The doctor gave her a mild sedative to help with the shivering, but she is waking up. Nico stopped pacing. Did she say anything? No. She is confused. Leo hesitated. Boss, we do not know who she is. We should not have brought her here. This is a security risk. Nico turned his cold stare on his second-in-command. The risk was leaving her to die. Find out everything about the yacht. I want to know who was on it, who the captain is, and who that coward was standing on the deck watching her fall. I am already on it, Leo said. But she is awake. She looks panicked. Nico walked past him and pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by the monitor casting a rhythmic green glow. The woman, Ava. He remembered the dossier Leo had quickly pulled up on the ride over, was sitting up in the bed. She looked small against the white pillows, her skin pale, a stark contrast to the dark bruises forming on her arms. When Nico entered, she flinched violently. Her eyes darted to the armed guard standing discreetly in the corner, and then to Nico's silhouette in the doorway. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the headboard, clutching the sheets to her chest. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice raw from the salt water. "Who are you?" Nico signaled the guard to leave. The man nodded and slipped out, leaving them alone. Nico stepped into the light, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, like approaching a startled horse. "You are safe," Nico said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the sharp edge of command he used with his men. "You are in a private clinic. You had hypothermia." Ava stared at him. Recognition flickered in her eyes. He was the man from the water, the man who had screamed at her to stay awake, but seeing him now, in the dry, stark light, she realized something else. He carried himself with a terrifying kind of grace. He was too handsome, too intense, and the way he looked at her was heavy with ownership. "I need to leave," she said, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She was wearing a hospital gown that was too big for her. As soon as her feet touched the floor, her knees buckled. Nico was there in an instant. He caught her before she hit the linoleum, his hands gripping her waist firmly. He easily lifted her back onto the mattress, ignoring her weak attempt to push him away. "You are not going anywhere," he said. "Your body is in shock." "I have to go," she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "They will come back. They will know I am not dead." Nico captured her hand. Her fingers were still cool, but not the deathly ice of the ocean. He held her hand between both of his, forcing her to stop flailing and look at him. "Hold on to me," he ordered softly. She froze, her breath hitching. It was the same thing he had said in the water. "Nobody is throwing you into the ocean again," Nico promised. "Not while I am breathing." Ava looked down at their joined hands. His were large, warm and scarred, the hands of a fighter. She looked back up at his face, seeing the hard line of his jaw and the dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her defenses. "You are one of them," she whispered, a tremor running through her. "You are not the police. You are like them." "I am nothing like the men who did this to you," Nico said, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a soothing rhythm that contradicted the danger in his eyes. "They tried to kill you. I saved you. That makes us very different." Ava pulled her hand away, clutching it to her chest. "Why? Why did you save me?" "Because I was there," Nico said simply, "and I do not like waste." He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, bringing himself to her eye level. The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken tension. Ava felt trapped, caught between the memory of the freezing water and the burning intensity of the man sitting in front of her. "I know you are scared," Nico said. "You have every right to be. But walking out that door is a death sentence. The men who threw you off that boat did it to silence you. If you walk out onto the street, they will finish the job within the hour." Ava closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Eric," she whispered. He just watched. The name made Nico's jaw tighten. "The man on the deck, he's my ex-boyfriend," Ava admitted, her voice hollow. "He told me we needed to talk. He said he was in trouble. I went to the boat because I thought I could help him. And instead, he traded you for his own safety," Nico concluded grimly. Ava opened her eyes, looking at Nico with a mix of desperation and defiance. "I heard them. They were talking about a shipment, laundering money through a shell corporation in the Caymans. I saw the ledger on the table. When they realized I was there..." She stopped, her throat closing up. Nico leaned forward. "Listen to me carefully. Ava, you are a witness to a crime committed by very dangerous people. The Black Harbor Syndicate does not leave loose ends." He saw the recognition of the name in her eyes. She knew who they were. Everyone in Harborview knew the rumors, even if they did not speak them aloud. "I can protect you," Nico said. "I have a house. It is a fortress." "No one gets in unless I allow it." Ava shook her head. "I cannot go with you. I don't even know your name." "Nico Romano," he said. The color drained from her face completely. The Romano family. The rivals of the syndicate. She had jumped from the frying pan into the fire. "You are the head of the Romano family," she whispered. "I am," Nico acknowledged, "which means I am the only person in this city powerful enough to keep Victor Kane from killing you." He stood up, the movement fluid and commanding. He extended his hand to her again, palm up, an offer, a lifeline. "I will make you a deal, Ava. You tell me everything you saw on that yacht, every face, every name, every number you heard. In exchange, I give you my protection. You stay under my roof, you eat at my table, and no one touches a hair on your head." Ava looked at his hand. She thought of Eric's face as he watched her fall. She thought of the cold water filling her lungs. She realized she had no money, no weapon, and nowhere to go that these men could not find her. She looked up at Nico. He was dangerous. Yes, the darkness in him was palpable. But when he had held her in the water, he hadn't let go. He had dragged her back to the land of the living when everyone else had abandoned her. "If I tell you," Ava said, her voice shaking but resolute, "do you promise I can leave when it is over?" Nico did not blink. "When it is safe. You can do whatever you want, but until then, you are with me." Ava hesitated for 1 second more, sensing that taking his hand was signing a contract with fate. Then she reached out. Her fingers slid into his palm. Nico's fingers closed around hers, warm and unbreakable. "Deal," he said. He pulled her gently but firmly toward the edge of the bed. "The nurse is bringing you clothes. Get dressed. We are leaving in 10 minutes. As he turned to walk to the door, he paused, looking back at her. "And Ava?" She looked up, clutching the sheet. "Yes?" Nico's eyes were dark, filled with a promise of violence for his enemies and something unnameable for her. "Forget about Eric Dalton. He's a dead man walking." Nico walked out, leaving Ava alone in the silence, the heat of his hand still lingering on her skin like a brand. She had survived the storm, but she had the sinking feeling that the true danger was only just beginning. The Romano estate sat on the jagged edge of a cliff like a predator observing its territory. It was a sprawling structure of gray stone and reinforced glass, isolated from the rest of Harborview by a winding private road and a dense forest of pine trees. To the average observer, it was a masterpiece of modern architecture. To Ava Collins, watching the iron gates close behind the black SUV, it looked like a very expensive prison. The storm that had nearly claimed her life was still raging, though the rain had softened to a steady, relentless drizzle. The ocean below crashed against the rocks, a distant, rhythmic, booming sound that made Ava's skin crawl. Nico sat beside her in the back seat, silent. He had not spoken since they left the clinic. He was busy typing on a secure phone, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. He looked composed, his wet hair slicked back, his white shirt drying against his skin. He seemed entirely unaffected by the fact that he had just jumped into a freezing ocean. Ava, by contrast, felt like a raw nerve. The sedative the doctor had given her was wearing off, leaving behind a jagged exhaustion. She was wearing a dry tracksuit Leo had purchased from a 24-hour store on the way, but she could still feel the phantom weight of the water dragging her down. The car stopped in a circular driveway. Leo killed the engine. "Welcome to the fortress," Leo said, glancing in the rearview mirror. Nico opened his door and stepped out, offering a hand to Ava. She hesitated, looking at the massive oak front doors flanked by security cameras, but the wind cut through her jacket, reminding her that the only warmth available was inside. She took his hand. His grip was firm, grounding her as she stepped onto the gravel. Inside. The foyer was a cavern of marble and shadow. A crystal chandelier hung from a vaulted ceiling, casting fractured light over an abstract steel sculpture that looked suspiciously like a weapon. A woman was waiting for them at the top of the double staircase. She descended with the grace of a queen and the expression of an executioner. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. This was Isabella Romano. "You are late," Isabella said, her voice cool and crisp. "And you are wet." "Plans changed," Nico said, guiding Ava forward. "Isabella, this is Ava Collins. She will be staying with us for the immediate future." Isabella stopped on the bottom step, her dark eyes sweeping over Ava with surgical precision. She noted the cheap tracksuit, the bruised jaw, and the trembling hands. She did not look impressed. "Staying with us," Isabella repeated. She looked at Nico. "A civilian here." "She is a witness," Nico corrected, his tone sharpening. "Kane's men threw her off a yacht tonight." Isabella's expression shifted from judgment to calculation. She looked at Ava again, this time seeing not a stray dog, but a tactical problem. "If Victor is dumping bodies in the harbor, he's getting sloppy," Isabella said, "but bringing her here is reckless. Nico, if the police trace her to this house, we are looking at kidnapping charges. If Victor finds out she is here, we are looking at a siege. She stays," Nico said. "The decision is made." Isabella held his gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills between siblings who had run an empire together for a decade. "Finally," Isabella sighed, a short, sharp sound of concession. "Leo, check the perimeter sensors," Isabella ordered, turning her back on them. "I will have the guest suite in the East Wing prepared. But Nico, if this girl brings the war to our doorstep, the cleanup is on you." She walked away, her heels clicking on the marble with militaristic rhythm. Ava watched her go, feeling a fresh wave of anxiety. "Your sister does not seem happy I am here." "Isabella is never happy," Nico said, placing a hand on the small of Ava's back to guide her forward. "She's pragmatic. She handles the legitimate side of the business. Shipping, real estate, investments. She hates anything that disrupts the bottom line. And I am a disruption," Ava said. "You are a guest," Nico corrected. "Come, you need rest." For the next 2 days, Ava existed in a strange limbo. The mansion was beautiful, filled with museum-quality art and furniture that cost more than she made in 5 years of bartending. But it was undeniably a cage. There were armed men patrolling the grounds. There were cameras in the hallways. Every door seemed to have a keypad lock. She walked the corridors in borrowed clothes, silk blouses and cashmere sweaters that Isabella had sent up. All of them beautiful, and all of them slightly too big, making Ava feel like a child playing dress-up. She felt like a prisoner and a guest simultaneously. The staff brought her gourmet meals on silver trays, but she could not leave the property. She saw Nico rarely. He was a ghost in his own house, disappearing into his study for hours, his voice drifting out in low, angry murmurs as he spoke on the phone. On the third evening, The weather turned violent again. A thunderstorm rolled in off the Atlantic, shaking the foundations of the house. Ava had been trying to read in the library, but the sound of the thunder sounded too much like the engine of the yacht. The flash of lightning looked too much like the searchlight that had blinded her before she fell. She wandered out onto the large stone balcony overlooking the cliffs. It was a foolish place to be, exposed to the wind and the spray, but she needed to see the water. She needed to know where the enemy was. The ocean was a churning mass of black ink and white foam. The waves smashed against the rocks 200 feet below, sending spray high into the air. Ava gripped the stone railing, her knuckles white, staring down into the abyss. The memory washed over her, the freezing cold, the salt in her mouth, the sensation of sinking. She did not hear the glass door slide open behind her. "You should not be out here." A deep voice rumbled. Ava jumped, spinning around. Nico was standing in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the interior lights. He held a thick wool sweater in his hand. He stepped out into the wind, the gale tugging at his dark shirt. "It is freezing," Nico said. He stepped close to her, invading her personal space with a casual confidence that made her breath hitch. He shook out the sweater and draped it around her shoulders. The wool was heavy and smelled of sandalwood and rain. His hands lingered for a second on her upper arms, feeling the tremors that were shaking her frame. "I could not breathe inside," Ava said, pulling the sweater tighter around herself. "The house is too quiet, and the storm is loud," Nico countered. He moved to stand beside her, resting his forearms on the railing, looking out at the violent water. "I understand," he said quietly. "The ocean is a monster tonight. When I was a boy, my father used to tell me that the sea demands respect because it has no conscience. It takes what it wants. It wanted me," Ava whispered, staring at the whitecaps. Nico turned his head to look at her. His profile was sharp, carved from granite and shadow. "But it didn't get you," he said. Ava looked up at him. The lightning flashed, illuminating the sharp angles of his face and the scar above his eyebrow. He was terrified and beautiful all at once. Being this close to him made her nerves sing with a mixture of fear and something hotter, something she did not want to name. "You make me nervous," Ava admitted, her voice barely audible over the wind. Nico shifted, turning his body fully toward her. He leaned down, closing the distance between them until his face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a furnace against the cold night. "Good," Nico murmured. "You should be nervous. The world is a dangerous place. Ava, complacency gets you killed." He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair away from her face. His touch was gentle, at odds with the violence of the storm and the reputation of his name. "But you do not need to fear me," he added, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that vibrated in her chest. "I only drag people out of the water. Ava, I do not push them in." His breath mingled with hers, warm and smelling of scotch. For a heartbeat, time suspended. Ava stared at his mouth, wondering what it would feel like to close that final inch of space. The attraction was sudden and overwhelming, a chemical reaction sparked by danger and gratitude. Then the thunder cracked directly overhead, a sound like a gunshot. Ava flinched, pulling back sharply. Her heart was racing, thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I should go inside," she stammered, clutching the sweater. Nico did not move. He watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Go," he said. "Get some sleep." Ava fled the balcony, leaving him alone with the storm. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house had shifted from waiting to working. Nico found Ava in the breakfast nook, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. He dropped a manila folder onto the table in front of her. "Eat," he said, sitting opposite her. "We have work to do." Ava looked at the folder. "What is this?" "Confirmations," Nico said. "Leo has been digging. Your ex-boyfriend, Eric Dalton, has been on the Black Harbor payroll for 6 months. He's a low-level fixer. He handles logistics for their smuggling operations." Ava felt a sick twist in her stomach. 6 months? We were dating for 6 months. Nico nodded grimly. "It was not a coincidence. Kane likely targeted you because of your job at the Marina bar. They thought you would be a good listening post, or maybe Eric just needed a cover. But when you went to that yacht, you stopped being a girlfriend and became a liability. He works for Victor Kane, Ava said, the reality sinking in. The man who runs the syndicate? Yes, Nico said. And because you can identify Eric, and you saw the ledger on that boat, you are now the most dangerous weapon I have against Kane. You are a witness to a federal crime. Ava pushed the coffee away. So I am a pawn. You are a key, Nico corrected, but keys are easily lost if they are not careful. He stood up. Finish your coffee. Meet me in the gym in 20 minutes. The gym? Ava asked. If you are going to stay alive around me, Nico said, his tone brokering no argument. You do not get to be helpless. The mansion's gym was located in the basement, a massive room lined with mirrors and filled with heavy bags, free weights, and mats. When Ava arrived, Nico had already removed his dress shirt. He was wearing a black tank top that exposed the heavy wall of muscle in his chest and arms, and the intricate tattoos that covered his left shoulder, ink that looked like waves and thorns. Ava stood in the doorway, feeling suddenly very overdressed in her yoga pants and t-shirt. Come here, Nico ordered, wrapping his hands with tape. He spent the first hour teaching her how to stand. Balance, he told her repeatedly, nudging her feet apart with his own. If you have no balance, you have no fight. He was a relentless teacher. He did not coddle her. When she threw a punch at the heavy bag and her wrist buckled, he made her do it again and again, until her knuckles ached and her breath came in short gasps. Now, defense, Nico said. He moved behind her. He stepped in close, his chest pressing against her back. Ava stiffened, the sudden contact sending a jolt of electricity down her spine. He was solid, immovable, his body heat enveloping her. Relax, Nico instructed, his voice right beside her ear. If someone grabs you from behind, panic is your enemy. He wrapped his arm around her neck, not choking her, but simulating the hold. His bicep pressed against her throat. His other hand gripped her wrist. They will pull you back, Nico said, pulling her slightly off balance. They want to control your center of gravity. You need to break that control. Drop your weight, he commanded. Ava bent her knees, sinking down. Good. Now, turn your chin into the crook of my elbow so you can breathe. Grab my forearm with both hands and pull down, hard. Ava tugged at his arm. It was like trying to move a steel beam. Harder. Nico growled. Use your body weight. She gritted her teeth and threw her weight forward while yanking down on his arm. It shifted, just an inch, but it was enough. Now stomp on my instep and drive your elbow back, Nico said. She simulated the motion. Again, Nico said, faster. They ran the drill a dozen times. Each time, the clinical nature of the lesson began to fray. Ava became hyper-aware of the way his muscles shifted against her back, the scent of his sweat and soap, the rough texture of his hands guiding her arms. On the last attempt, she put everything into it. She dropped, twisted, and spun out of his grip, stumbling a few feet away. She turned around, chest heaving, hair falling in her face. She expected him to correct her form. Instead, Nico was watching her with a darkness in his eyes that had nothing to do with self-defense. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The air in the room grew thick, charged with the same raw intensity that had been on the balcony. Good, Nico said, though, his voice rougher than usual. That was adequate. He walked over to the bench and grabbed a towel, wiping his face to break the tension. Ava leaned against the wall, trying to slow her heart rate. I met him at the library, Ava said suddenly. Nico stopped wiping his face. He looked at her. Eric, she clarified. He dropped a stack of books. It was so cliched. He smiled, and he looked so normal. He wore glasses. He talked about architecture. He acted like he was terrified of the world. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the mats, hugging her knees. I suspected he was into something shady a few weeks ago. He had cash he couldn't explain. He was taking calls in the middle of the night. When I tried to break up with him, he cried. He begged me to come to the boat. He said he was in trouble and just needed to talk. Her voice trembled. When those men grabbed me, I looked at him. I looked right at him, Nico, and he looked away. He He was so scared of them that he let them kill me. Nico walked over to her. He did not stand over her. He crouched down, resting his forearms on his knees, bringing himself into her space. He was a weak man, Nico said. Weak men are dangerous because they will sacrifice anyone to save themselves. He reached out, tilting her chin up with his knuckles. You are not weak, Ava. You fought in the water. You are fighting now. Ava looked into his eyes, searching for the truth. She saw a violence in him. Yes, but it was controlled. Directed. Listen to me, Nico said, his voice dropping to a steady, dangerous register. If you stay under my roof, if you trust me with what you know, I make you a promise. No one lays a hand on you again unless you want them to. The phrasing hung in the air. Unless you want them to. Ava flushed, the heat rising in her cheeks. The accidental intimacy of the words seemed to echo in the quiet gym. Nico did not retract them. He held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, letting the weight of the promise settle around her like a shield. Then he stood up, offering her a hand. Go shower, he said. We are done for today. That night, the silence of the house was broken by raised voices. Ava had come down to the kitchen to find water. She stopped in the hallway when she heard Isabella's voice coming from the study. The door was cracked open. She is a liability. Nico, Isabella was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. We've kept her for 3 days. We have the intel on Dalton. Hand her over to the feds. Let the FBI put her in protection. No. Nico's voice was lower, a deep rumble of refusal. The Bureau is leaking like a sieve. If we give her to them, Kane will know where she is within 24 hours. She will be dead before she signs the witness statement. Since when do you care so much about a stray bartender? Isabella demanded. This is not like you. You are making emotional decisions. That is how empires fall. I am making a decision to not let a woman be slaughtered because we were too lazy to protect her, Nico snapped. The sound of his hand slamming onto the heavy wooden desk echoed through the hall. Ava flinched. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella walked out of the study a moment later. She saw Ava standing in the shadows of the hallway. Isabella paused, her expression unreadable, before she shook her head and marched up the stairs without a word. Ava hesitated, then walked to the open door of the study. Nico was standing by the window, staring out at the dark grounds. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired. The armor of the Mafia boss seemed to have slipped, revealing a man carrying a heavy weight. I heard you, Ava said softly. Nico did not turn around. I figured you did. This house has terrible acoustics. You should listen to your sister, Ava said, also stepping into the room. I am a problem you do not need. Nico turned then. He took a sip of his drink, watching her over the rim of the glass. I do not need many things, he said. I do not need a war with Kane. I do not need the feds breathing down my neck, but I have them. He set the glass down and walked over to where she stood in the doorway. The kitchen lights were off, leaving them in the ambient glow of the hallway lamps. Why? Ava asked, looking up at him. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Nico looked down at her. His eyes traced the line of her jaw, the pulse beating in her neck. I can feel it, he said quietly. Feel what? Your hand, Nico said, when I was in the water. When I grabbed you. You squeezed my shirt so hard I thought you would tear through the fabric. You were drowning, freezing, dying. And you held on to me like I was God. He took a step closer, crowding her against the doorframe. I have spent my life taking things. Ava, territory, money, lives. I am not a good man. But when I pulled you onto that boat, when I felt your heart beating against my chest, he stopped, shaking his head as if he couldn't quite understand it himself. I cannot shake the feeling, he admitted, his voice rough. I do not trust anyone else to keep you alive. If I let you go, and you die, I will feel that water in my lungs for the rest of my life. Ava stared at him, her breath catching. He wasn't keeping her as a pawn. He was keeping her because saving her was the only thing that made him feel clean in a dirty world. She reached out, her hand hovering over his arm before resting gently on his bicep. I am not leaving, she whispered. Nico covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his arm. The contact was electric, a silent vow in the darkness of the kitchen. "Good," he said, "because I am not letting you go." The war came to Harborview at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. It did not arrive with a declaration or a meeting, but with a shockwave that shattered the windows of the Romano import and export offices in the downtown district. A sedan packed with industrial explosives detonated at the curb, turning the steel facade of Nico's legitimate business front into a twisted sculpture of smoking metal and glass. At the cliffside mansion, the sound was too distant to be heard over the wind, but the vibration seemed to travel through the earth, unsettling the birds in the pine forest. Nico was in the library when Leo Costa burst through the double doors. Leo was a man who rarely sweated, but today his face was sheen with perspiration and his usually immaculate suit jacket was unbuttoned. "Turn on the news," Leo said, his voice tight. Nico picked up the remote and flicked the television on. The screen was filled with aerial footage of black smoke billowing into the gray sky above the harbor district. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Explosion at Downtown Logistics Center. Authorities suspect gang violence." "Isabella was in the building?" Nico asked, his voice devoid of inflection, though the knuckles of his hand gripping the remote turned white. "No, she was at the bank meeting. The office was empty, except for security. 2 guards are in critical condition, but no fatalities." Nico turned the television off. The silence that returned to the room was heavier than before. "It is a message," Nico said. Leo nodded. "It is Victor Kane. He's done being subtle. He's telling us that he knows we are hiding something, and he is willing to burn the city down to get it." Ava was standing in the doorway. She'd been on her way to the kitchen when she saw Leo run past. She'd heard every word, the color drained from her face. She looked from the blank television screen to Nico's rigid back. She felt a crushing weight settle on her chest, a guilt so heavy it made it hard to breathe. The guards, the smoke, the violence. It was all happening because she had not drowned. "It is me," Ava said, stepping into the room. Nico turned slowly. His eyes were hard, his mind clearly calculating tactical responses. But when his gaze landed on her, the edge softened imperceptibly. "Go back to your room." "Ava." "No," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "He did this because of me, because you are protecting me." Nico walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. "He did this because he is a rabid dog who wants my territory." "You are just the excuse he is using today. That is not true," Ava argued. She took a step back, looking toward the front door as if she could see the burning building through the walls. "If I leave, he stops. If I go to the police, or just disappear, he has no reason to attack you." Nico's expression darkened. "Disappear? Do you think you can just walk out of here and fade away? Kane has eyes on every bus station, airport, and train platform in the state. I have to try." Ava cried out, panic rising in her throat. "I cannot stay here and watch people get hurt because of me. I am bringing a war to your doorstep. Nico, let me go." She turned, making a desperate move toward the hallway, her instinct to flee overwhelming her logic. Nico moved faster than she thought possible. He cut off her path, his large frame filling the corridor. When she tried to sidestep him, he slammed his palm against the wall. The sound was like a gunshot. It was not close enough to hit her, but the vibration traveled through the plaster and into her shoulder. Ava froze, gasping, her back pressed against the opposite wall. She looked up at him, eyes wide with sudden fear. Nico was breathing hard, his control fracturing. He leaned in, towering over her, his face a mask of dark fury. "If you walk out that door," he growled, his voice vibrating in his chest, "you will be dead before sunrise. Do you understand me? They will not just kill you. Ava, they will make it last." Ava trembled, tears pricking her eyes. "I just want it to stop," she whispered. Nico stared at her, seeing the terror he had put in her eyes. The anger drained out of him as quickly as it had come, replaced by a desperate, aching need to shield her. He realized he had scared her, and the thought made his stomach turn. He lowered his hand from the wall. His posture shifted, the aggression melting into something profoundly weary and tender. He stepped closer, invading her space not to intimidate, but to encompass. He reached out, cupping her face gently between his hands. His thumbs brushed away the moisture gathering on her lower lashes. His skin was warm, his touch reverent. "I dragged you out of that sea," Nico said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am not throwing you back." Ava's breath hitched. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He wasn't keeping her prisoner to use her. He was keeping her because the idea of losing her was unacceptable to him. For a heartbeat. They hovered in the narrow hallway, suspended between fear and longing. Ava leaned slightly into his touch, her hands coming up to rest tentatively on his wrists. The violence of the morning felt a million miles away, leaving only the steady, rapid beat of his heart and hers. "We are not discussing this again," Nico murmured, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You stay." Ava nodded, unable to speak. By evening, the weather had conspired with the mood of the house. Another storm front had moved in, heavier than the last, bringing with it gusts of wind that rattled the window panes. At 8 o'clock, the power died. The mansion plunged into darkness for 3 seconds before the backup generators kicked in. The main overhead lights remained off, but emergency sconces along the walls flickered to life, casting long, soft shadows across the furniture. The hum of the refrigerator and the security system were the only mechanical sounds. The rest was the drumming of rain against glass. Nico found Ava in the main living room. She was sitting on one end of the long, velvet sofa, a blanket pulled up to her chin. She was staring at the fireplace, where a gas log was providing a steady, warm glow. "Mind if I sit?" Nico asked. Ava shook her head. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, discarding his suit jacket on the armrest. He loosened his tie, looking more relaxed than she had seen him all day. The tension of the bombing had settled into a quiet vigilance. He looked at her. She looked small in the dim light, her profile softened by the amber glow of the fire. "Do you hate the storms?" Nico asked quietly. "I used to love them," Ava admitted, pulling her knees up to her chest. "When I was a little girl, living in Verify, we had a tin roof. The rain sounded like music. Now it sounds like the ocean." Nico finished for her. She nodded. "It will pass," Nico said. "The fear, it fades. Does it?" Ava turned to look at him. "You do not seem afraid of anything." Nico gave a short, humorless laugh. "I am afraid of plenty. I am just good at hiding it." He stretched his legs out, crossing his ankles. "My father was a violent man," Nico said, the confession coming out of nowhere. "He taught me that fear was a weakness. If you showed it, he would beat it out of you. So I learned to swallow it. I learned to turn it into anger. Anger is useful. Fear paralyzes you." Ava watched him, fascinated by the glimpse behind the armor. "My father was a baker," she said softly. "He smelled like yeast and cinnamon. He died when I was 12. My mother, she just gave up. I moved to Harborview because I wanted to see the world. I thought the city was full of possibilities." "It is," Nico said. "Just not all of them are good." A clap of thunder shook the house, loud and sudden. The lights flickered. Ava flinched violently, her hand jerking out from under the blanket to grip the cushion. She squeezed her eyes shut, her breathing spiking. Nico moved without hesitation. He shifted on the couch, sliding closer until he was beside her. He reached out and wrapped his large hand around her trembling fist, anchoring her. "Breathe," he commanded gently. "It is just noise." He tugged on her hand, a silent invitation. Ava opened her eyes and looked at him. The distance between them on the couch felt like a canyon she was terrified to cross, but staying on her side felt colder. She shifted, allowing him to pull her. Nico guided her until she was sitting between his knees, her back resting against the solid wall of his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling the blanket tight to cocoon them both. He rested his chin lightly on her shoulder, his presence a physical shield against the storm outside. "Better?" he murmured against her hair. "Yes," Ava whispered. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. It was slow, controlled, a counterpoint to the chaotic hammering of her own heart. The warmth of his body seeped into hers, chasing away the chill that seemed to live in her bones since the drowning. They sat like that for a long time, watching the firelight dance on the walls. The intimacy was thick in the air, heavy and sweet. It wasn't the desperate clinging of the rescue, it was something quieter, something domestic and dangerous all at once. Nico shifted slightly, turning his head so his cheek brushed against hers. His stubble was rough, a friction that sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You are trembling," Nico whispered. "I know," Ava breathed. He moved one hand from her waist, bringing it up to brush a strand of hair away from her cheek. His fingers trailed down, tracing the line of her jaw, the sensitive skin of her throat. His touch was fire. Ava turned in his arms, shifting so she could look at him. Their faces were inches apart. In the dim emergency light, his eyes were black pools, searching hers. He looked hungry, but restrained, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. She leaned into his hand, her lips parting. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it against his chest. "Nico," she whispered, and his name sounded like a prayer. He froze, his thumb resting on her lower lip. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low and rough, giving her a way out, asking her to choose this, rather than having it happen to her. Ava didn't answer with words. She closed the distance. It was a tentative kiss at first, a question. Her lips brushed his, soft and hesitant. Nico made a sound low in his throat, a growl of surrender. His hand slid from her jaw to the small of her back, pressing her closer. He took control, deepening the kiss, tilting her head back. The kiss ignited. It was not polite. It was desperate and consuming, tasting of whiskey and rain. Ava's fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more. She felt the tension in his body, the coil of controlled strength. He was holding himself back. She realized he could crush her, overwhelm her, but he was handling her like she was made of spun glass. His tongue swept into her mouth, claiming her, and for the first time in days, Ava didn't feel like a victim. She felt alive. She felt wanted. Nico pulled back abruptly, gasping for air. He pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes squeezed shut. His hands were gripping her arms, his thumbs digging in slightly before he relaxed his hold. "I cannot," he rasped. Ava blinked, dazed, her lips swollen and tingling. "Why? Because you are scared," Nico said, his voice strained. "You are vulnerable. You are in my house because you have nowhere else to go. If I take this further, if I take you now, I am no better than the men who use people." "But I want this," Ava whispered. Nico opened his eyes. The intensity in them almost burned her. "And I want you more than I want my next breath. But not like this. Not while you are shaking." He smoothed her hair back, his touch agonizingly gentle. "When we do this, Ava, it will be because you are safe. Because you chose it when the sun was shining. Not just in the dark when you were afraid." Before Ava could respond, before she could tell him that he was the only safety she understood anymore, the heavy oak door to the living room swung open. "Boss!" Leo's voice cut through the atmosphere like a knife. Nico and Ava sprang apart. Nico stood up immediately, his body shielding Ava from the door, his hand instinctively going to the waistband of his trousers where he kept his gun. Though he wasn't wearing it, Leo stood in the doorway, looking apologetic but urgent. He held a secure tablet in his hand. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Leo said, averting his eyes from the disheveled state of the blanket on the couch, "but we have a problem. A big one. Report," Nico said, his voice snapping back to command mode, though his chest was still heaving slightly. "We found the leak," Leo said grimly. "It is not digital. It is human. One of the house staff. A maid. She has been texting a burner number for 3 days. Nico swore, a harsh Italian curse. "What did she tell them?" "She told them about the guest," Leo said. "She told them you have the girl from the sea. She gave them a description. And she gave them the floor plan of the East Wing." Ava went cold. The warmth of the kiss evaporated instantly. Nico turned to look at her. His face was grim. "The mansion is compromised," Nico said. "If Kane has the floor plans, he's planning an extraction or a hit. We cannot defend this house against a siege without turning it into a war zone." "Where do we go?" Ava asked, standing up. Her legs felt shaky. "Pack a bag," Nico ordered. "Just the essentials. We are leaving in 5 minutes." The car ride was a blur of rain-slicked roads and tension. Leo drove, taking a winding route north, doubling back twice to ensure they were not being followed. Nico and Ava sat in the back of the armored SUV. They had left the city limits behind, the lights of Harborview fading into the rearview mirror. Now, there was only the coastal highway, a ribbon of asphalt sandwiched between the dark forest and the raging ocean. Nico was silent, constantly scanning the mirrors and the side of the road. He was in protector mode, his body tense, his mind working through scenarios. Ava felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her, the adrenaline of the kiss, the fear of the leak, the trauma of the last few days. It was all too much. Her eyelids felt heavy. Her head lolled against the cool glass of the window, watching the rain streak horizontally. She shivered. Without a word, Nico reached across the seat. He placed his hand on her shoulder and gently pulled her toward him. "Come here," he murmured. Ava didn't fight him. She let herself slide across the leather seat until her head rested on his shoulder. He smelled of the storm and the faint, lingering scent of her own perfume from where he had held her. She closed her eyes, in the darkness of the car, illuminated only by the rhythmic sweep of passing headlights. Nico's hand found hers. He laced their fingers together, his grip firm and unyielding. It was a quiet, protective gesture, a promise that he was the wall between her and the world. She squeezed his hand back and felt him relax. Just a fraction. The safe house was not a house. It was a cabin, buried deep in the woods on the edge of a secluded lake 40 miles north of the city. It was modest, built of rough-hewn logs, with a gravel driveway and no security fences. It looked like a place where a family might spend a summer vacation, not a place where a mafia boss hid a witness. Leo stayed in the car to secure the perimeter. Nico unlocked the front door and ushered Ava inside. The air inside was stale and cold. Nico moved efficiently, turning on the main breaker and lighting a fire in the stone hearth. The cabin was small, a main room with a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms down a short hall. "There are no cameras here," Nico said, locking the deadbolt, no staff, no internet. "Kane does not know this place exists. It is off the books." He turned to face her. In the stark light of the single overhead bulb, they both looked exhausted. The intimacy of the couch back at the mansion hung between them, a ghost of what had almost happened. "There are 2 bedrooms," Nico said, gesturing down the hall. "You take the one on the left. It has the better view of the lake. I will take the one on the right." Ava nodded. "Separate rooms. For clarity, thank you," she said softly. "For getting me out?" Nico looked at her, his eyes dark. "I told you. I am not throwing you back." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, to cross the space between them and finish what they had started on the couch. But the threat of Kane, the leak, and the reality of their situation held him back. "Sleep well, Ava," he said instead. "Good night, Nico." Ava went into her room and closed the door. She did not undress. She lay down on top of the quilt, staring at the wooden ceiling. On the other side of the wall, she heard the creak of the bed springs as Nico sat down. They lay there in the silence of the deep woods, separated by 6 inches of pine and drywall, both wide awake. Ava touched her lips, which still throbbed slightly. Nico stared at his hands. They were safe for tonight. But as the wind howled through the trees outside, they both knew that the storm was far from over. And they both wondered, with a painful ache in their chests, if 2 people from such different worlds could ever have something normal, or if violence would always be the 3rd person in their bed. The illusion of safety lasted exactly 6 hours. The sun had risen over the lake, casting a deceptive golden light through the pine trees surrounding the cabin. For a moment, standing in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, Ava felt almost normal. The silence of the woods was a stark contrast to the crashing waves of Harborview, and the air smelled of pine needles instead of salt and gasoline. Then Leo walked in through the front door, his face pale and grim. "Do not go outside," Leo said, his voice tight. Nico, who had been checking his weapon at the kitchen table, looked up sharply. He did not ask questions. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the wood floor, and walked past Leo. Ava followed. Ignoring Leo's protest, they walked down the gravel path to the small, weathered boathouse at the water's edge. The message was impossible to miss. Someone had used bright red spray paint to deface the gray wood of the structure. The letters were jagged and dripping, looking like fresh wounds on the building. "Return what isn't yours. Romano." Ava covered her mouth with her hand, the coffee in her stomach turning to acid. "They found us," she whispered. Nico stared at the words. His face was a mask of terrifying calm, but Ava could see the muscle in his jaw jumping. He reached out and touched the paint. "It is still wet," Nico said. "They were here less than an hour ago." He turned to Leo. "How? This place is off the grid. No digital footprint. No deed in my name." Leo looked sick. "I do not know, boss. We swept the car for trackers. We took the back roads, unless someone told them." Nico finished, his voice dropping to a lethal temperature. He looked at the dense forest surrounding them. The trees, which had seemed protective moments ago, now felt like the bars of a cage. Victor Kane knew where they were. He had sent a message instead of a hit squad, which meant he was toying with them, or waiting for something. "Get inside," Nico ordered, grabbing Ava's arm. "We are making a call." An hour later, a black sedan with government plates crunched up the gravel driveway. Nico stood on the porch, his arms crossed, watching the car approach. He had called in his marker. The woman who stepped out of the car did not look like someone who made deals with the mafia. Special Agent Maya Lawson was sharp, professional, and wore a windbreaker emblazoned with the FBI letters. She looked at Nico with a mixture of familiarity and disdain. "You are burning my favor, Nico," Maya said as she walked up the steps. "I can't exactly explain why I am meeting a known crime boss in the middle of the woods without a warrant. You are here because you want Victor Kane more than you want me," Nico replied, opening the door. "Come inside." They gathered in the small kitchen. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Maya sat at the table, opening a file folder. She looked at Ava, her gaze assessing but not unkind. "So this is the girl from the sea," Maya said. "You have caused quite a stir. Miss Collins, the entire waterfront is locking down. Kane is moving product like he expects a raid." Ava sat opposite her, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "He knows we are here. He painted a message on the boathouse." "I saw," Maya said, "which means you are running out of time." Maya turned to Nico. "My intel says Kane has expanded. It is not just smuggling anymore. He's moving into offshore accounts and human trafficking rings using the shipping lanes. We've been trying to crack his financial network for 2 years, but he is smart. He uses shell companies nested inside shell companies." She looked back at Ava. "But you saw the ledger." "I saw a screen," Ava corrected. "Eric left his laptop open on the yacht. I saw a list of transfers. They were going to a bank in the Caymans. There was a name at the top of the spreadsheet. V.K. Holdings." Maya leaned forward, her intensity spiking. "Did you see account numbers?" Ava closed her eyes, concentrating. The memory was hazy, obscured by the terror of the drowning, but pieces of it were etched into her mind. "I remember the last 4 digits of the routing number," Ava said slowly. 8902, and the amount, it was a transfer for $6 million. Maya let out a breath. "That is enough to get a subpoena for the bank records. If we can link that transfer to Kane, we can freeze his assets." She looked at Ava with a serious expression. "You realize what this means. You are the only person who can testify to seeing that file. If you help us, we can put you in witness protection. New name, new city. You never have to look over your shoulder again. But staying with him," Maya flicked her eyes toward Nico, "is dangerous. He's a target. And frankly, Miss Collins, he's not exactly a white knight." Ava stiffened. She felt Nico shift beside her, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "He saved my life," Ava said, her voice firm. "When everyone else watched me drown, he jumped in." Maya studied her. "He's a criminal. Ava. He runs the docks. He hurts people." "He has not hurt me," Ava countered. "He has protected me." Maya looked between them. She saw the way Nico was standing, positioned between Ava and the door, his body angled to shield her. She saw the way Ava looked to him for reassurance before she spoke. It was not the dynamic of a hostage and a captor. It was something far more volatile. "Be careful," Maya warned quietly. "Feelings have a way of getting people killed in this line of work." Maya pulled a second device from her bag, a small, black recorder. "We have an opportunity," Maya said, shifting gears. "Eric Dalton has been trying to contact you." Ava's blood went cold. "Eric, he has been texting your old number. He thinks you might be alive. He's panicking. Kane is tightening the screws, and Eric is the weak link. He wants to meet." "No," Nico said instantly. "Absolutely not." Maya ignored him, keeping her eyes on Ava. "If you meet him wearing a wire, you can get him to admit that Kane ordered the hit. Eric is desperate. He will talk. That recording, combined with your testimony about the ledger, puts Kane away for life." "She is not bait," Nico snarled, stepping forward. The air in the kitchen grew suffocating. "You are not putting her in a room with the man who tried to kill her. It is the only way to end this." "Nico," Maya snapped back. "Unless you plan on hiding in the woods forever?" Nico slammed his hand on the table. "I plan on keeping her alive. I will do it," Ava said. The room went silent. Nico whipped his head around to look at her, betrayal and fury warring in his eyes. "No," Nico said, his voice low and shaking. Ava stood up. "I'm tired of running. Nico, I'm tired of hiding in cabins and mansions while you and your men get blown up. If Eric is the weak link, then I'm going to break him. You are not a soldier." "Ava," Nico shouted, "you are a civilian. You have no idea what these men are capable of." "I know exactly what they are capable of," Ava shouted back, tears springing to her eyes. I felt the water in my lungs. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I am not your property. Nico, you saved my life, and I will be grateful to you until the day I die. But this is my fight too. I am doing this to stop them from hurting anyone else." Nico stared at her. He saw the fear in her trembling hands, but he also saw a steel spine that had not been there a week ago. She was terrified, but she was brave. He looked at Maya, who was watching the exchange with a neutral expression. "If anything happens to her," Nico said, his voice devoid of humanity, "I will not just kill you. Maya, I will burn your entire bureau to the ground." Maya nodded once. "Understood." Nico turned back to Ava. "I am going to be there. I will be 10 feet away. If he moves, if he even looks at you wrong, I am pulling you out." Ava nodded. "Okay." The preparation for the meeting took place in the bedroom. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Nico held the small, adhesive microphone in his hand. Ava stood in front of him near the dresser mirror. She was wearing a loose silk blouse that would hide the device. "Unbutton the top," Nico said. His voice was rough, lacking its usual composure. Ava undid the top 2 buttons of her blouse, exposing her collarbone and the slope of her chest. She tried to keep her breathing steady, but having him this close, with the impending danger hanging over them, made her skin prickle with heat. Nico stepped closer. He peeled the backing off the adhesive. "I hate this," he muttered as he carefully placed the device on the inside of her collar, hidden behind the lace trim. "I hate everything about this. It has to be done," Ava whispered. Nico's fingers brushed against the sensitive skin of her neck as he secured the wire. His touch was electric. He lingered there, his knuckles grazing her collarbone, his thumb resting on the pulse point at the base of her throat. He could feel her heart racing. He looked up, meeting her eyes in the reflection of the mirror. They were standing so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Listen to me," Nico said, his voice dropping to a hush. "If you get scared, if you feel like you are drowning again, you look for me. I will be right outside the window." He turned her around so she was facing him. He framed her face with his hands, his grip bordering on desperate. "Remember my face. Ava, hold on to it. You come back to me. Do you understand?" "Yes," Ava breathed. Nico stared at her mouth, his restraint fraying at the edges. He wanted to kiss the fear out of her. He wanted to lock her in this room and never let her leave. But he knew that keeping her in a cage would only kill the part of her that was learning to survive. He pressed his forehead against hers for one agonizing second. "Let's go," he said, pulling away. The meeting point was a waterfront cafe in the tourist district. It was public, crowded and loud, the safest place for a conversation that could get you killed. Ava sat at a small table near the window. She had a cup of tea in front of her that she hadn't touched. Outside, across the street, Nico sat in the black SUV. Leo was driving. Maya was in the back seat with the listening equipment. Nico wore an earpiece. He could hear Ava's breathing. It sounded jagged and fast. His hands were clenched into fists on his knees, his knuckles white. "He is here," Leo said. Eric Dalton walked into the cafe. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept looking over his shoulder. He wore a baseball cap pulled low. He sat down opposite Ava. Nico watched through the window, his body coiled like a spring. "Ava," Eric said, his voice cracking. It came through the earpiece, tinny and pathetic. "I didn't think you would come." "You killed me," Ava said. Her voice was steady, colder than Nico had ever heard it. "You watched them throw me in the water." "I didn't have a choice," Eric hissed, leaning across the table. "Victor, he's crazy." "Ava, he found out you saw the transfer. The shell companies. He said if I didn't handle it, he would kill me too." "There it is," Maya whispered in the car. "Admission of motive." Nico didn't care about the evidence. He cared about the way Eric was reaching for Ava's hand. Ava pulled her hand back. "So you traded my life for yours. I can fix it," Eric pleaded. "I have some money stashed away. We can run. We can go to Mexico. I can protect you." "Ava, please. I still love you." Nico let out a low growl in his throat. Ava laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "You love me. You let me drown. Eric, you are not a victim. You are a coward." Eric's face twisted. "You don't understand. You don't know what these people do." "I do," Ava said. "I know exactly what they do. And I know that I am done being afraid of you." She stood up. "Wait." Eric grabbed her wrist. Nico's hand hit the door handle. Ava ripped her arm away. "Do not touch me." She looked down at him with pure disgust. "I am not going anywhere with you. And if you ever come near me again, I won't be the one you have to worry about." She turned and walked out of the cafe. Eric sat there, frozen, looking small and defeated. Nico watched Ava walk out the door. She looked pale, shaking, but she was walking with her head up. As she passed the SUV, she didn't look at the car, but he saw her hand brush against her heart, a silent signal. She was safe. The drive back to the cabin was silent. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a heavy, emotional exhaust. It was raining again by the time they got inside. Maya took the recording and left immediately, promising to have the warrant by morning. Ava stood in the middle of the living room. She looked like she was going to shatter. Nico locked the door and turned around. "Ava?" She looked at him, and her face crumpled. The reality of it, hearing Eric's excuses, seeing the weakness in the man she had once trusted, broke the dam she had been building all week. A sob tore from her throat. Nico crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't ask permission this time. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping her tight against his chest. Ava buried her face in his shirt, clutching the fabric with desperate fingers, crying with the force of someone who had held it in for too long. He sat down on the edge of the small bed, pulling her down with him. She curled into his lap, weeping. Nico held her. He stroked her hair, his hand large and gentle. He rested his chin on the top of her head, rocking her slightly. "You did good," he murmured into her hair. "You did so good. Ava, he's so weak," she sobbed. "He wanted me to run away with him." "After everything, he's nothing," Nico said fiercely. "He's a ghost. You are alive." He ran his hand up and down her back, feeling the tremors in her spine. "You are stronger than him," Nico whispered. "You are stronger than any of the men trying to use you, even me." Ava pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Her eyes were red, her lashes wet, her face blotchy with emotion. To Nico, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Not you," she whispered. "You never used me. You stayed." The intimacy in the small room deepened, becoming heavy and thick. They were tangled together on the bed, the rain drumming on the roof. Nico looked at her mouth. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to lay her back on the mattress and worship her until the memory of the ocean and the cafe was erased from her mind. His body ached with the need for it, but he saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She was raw, open, and hurting. He leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead instead. "Sleep," he whispered. "I am right here." Ava rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She didn't move to her own room. And that night, Nico didn't make her. He lay down beside her, fully clothed, pulling the quilt over them both. He held her hand in the dark, a silent sentinel guarding her dreams, stopping short of the line he knew they couldn't uncross, but holding on just tight enough to keep her from drifting away. The city of Harborview was a gray blur of concrete and rain beyond the tinted windows of the armored sedan. Nico sat in the back seat, his posture rigid, watching the street corners with the paranoia of a man who knew a predator was hunting him. Beside him, Ava sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her knuckles white, the recording device. The small piece of plastic that held the power to destroy the Black Harbor Syndicate sat heavy in Nico's inside pocket. "We are 10 minutes from the drop point," Leo said from the driver's seat, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Maya says her team is in position." Nico nodded, his hand drifting unconsciously to rest on Ava's knee. "Stay sharp. Kane knows we have the recording. He will be desperate." The words had barely left his lips when the world exploded. There was no sound of a gunshot, only the sudden, terrifying disintegration of the rear passenger window. The reinforced glass shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, but held its shape for a fraction of a second before a second impact punched a hole right through it. "Get down!" Nico roared. He didn't wait for her to react. He threw his body over hers, slamming her down across the leather seat, covering her head with his arms. A bullet thudded into the upholstery inches from where Ava's head had been a moment before. "Sniper!" Leo shouted, stomping on the accelerator. The engine roared, the tires squealing on the wet asphalt as the heavy car lurched forward. Another shot rang out, this time pinging off the armored door panel with a metallic ringing sound that made Ava's ears ache. She was pressed into the floor mat, the weight of Nico's solid frame crushing the breath out of her. But she didn't complain. She could feel the tension vibrating through his muscles, the sheer animalistic drive to protect her. "He's on the roof!" Leo yelled, spinning the wheel. 11 o'clock! Gray sedan blocking the intersection. Nico lifted his head slightly, his eyes wild and dangerous. "Ram it." Leo didn't hesitate. He floored the gas pedal. The heavy SUV surged toward the blocking vehicle, a generic sedan positioned to trap them in the kill zone. Ava squeezed her eyes shut and braced herself. The impact was bone-jarring. Metal shrieked against metal, glass flew, and the SUV shuddered violently as it plowed into the sedan's rear quarter panel, spinning it out of the way. "Hold on!" Nico shouted, his arm tightening around her waist like a steel band. Leo regained control of the fishtailing vehicle and shot through the gap, tearing down the side street at 80 miles per hour. The sounds of the city, horns, shouting, the distant wail of sirens, blurred into a chaotic symphony of survival. Nico kept Ava pinned down for another 3 blocks, his body a human shield, until Leo confirmed they were clear. "We lost them," Leo said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "We are clear." Nico pulled back slowly, his hands immediately checking Ava, her face, her arms, her shoulders. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Is there blood?" Ava shook her head, gasping for air, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I am okay, I am okay." Nico pulled her upright and then crushed her to his chest. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her fear and her life. For a moment, the mafia boss vanished, replaced by a man who had come terrifyingly close to losing the only thing that mattered. He missed by 2 inches. Nico whispered into her hair, 2 inches. He pulled back, his face hardening into a mask of cold, lethal resolve. Take us to the mansion, Leo. But the meeting with Maya, Leo argued. Cancel it, Nico ordered. The rules have changed. Kane just tried to kill us in broad daylight. This isn't a legal battle anymore. It is a war, and I'm going to end it. The mansion was locked down tighter than a military base. Guards with assault rifles patrolled the perimeter, and the heavy steel shutters had been lowered over the windows. In the war room, Nico outlined the plan. It was madness. It was suicide. And it was the only card they had left to play. Ava stood by the map table, listening as Nico explained. He wanted to walk into a trap. He wanted to offer Victor Kane exactly what he wanted, Ava, in exchange for a truce. But it is a lie, Nico said, looking at Ava. We coordinate with Maya. We set the exchange for the docks tomorrow at noon. We tell Kane I am surrendering you to save my organization. He will come personally. He enjoys the victory too much to send a lackey. And when he takes me? Ava asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. He never takes you, Nico promised, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Maya's team will be hidden in the shipping containers. The moment Kane admits to the crimes, the moment he lays a hand on you, they swarm. We take down the entire leadership of the syndicate in one stroke. It is dangerous, Leo warned. If Kane shoots first. He won't, Nico said. He wants to gloat. He wants to see me broken. That is his weakness. Ava looked at the map of the docks. She looked at Nico. She was tired of hiding. She was tired of being the victim in a story written by violent men. She wanted to write the ending. I will do it, Ava said. Nico let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. You do not have to do this. Yes, I do, Ava said, but I have a condition. Nico raised an eyebrow. Name it, Eric. Ava said, if he is there, if he surrenders. You do not kill him. Nico's jaw tightened, the vein in his temple pulsed. The man who left you to drown? The man who set you up? He's pathetic, Ava said. Killing him doesn't make us safe. It just makes us murderers. I want this to be over, Nico. I want the blood to stop. Nico stared at her for a long moment. He hated the idea of mercy for Eric Dalton. Every instinct in his blood demanded retribution. But looking at Ava, at the strength in her eyes, the humanity she had managed to keep despite everything, he realized that denying her this would break something between them. Fine, Nico gritted out. If he surrenders, he lives. But if he raises a weapon, I put him down. Agreed, Ava said. That night, the mansion was quiet. The storm outside had broken, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating fog that clung to the cliffs. Nico found Ava in his bedroom. It was the safest room in the house, located in the center of the upper floor, away from the exterior walls. She was standing by the window, looking out at the hazy glow of the city lights reflecting off the low clouds. He closed the door, shutting out the guards, the strategies, and the impending violence. He had discarded his suit jacket and holster hours ago. He unbuttoned his shirt as he walked in, tossing it onto a chair. He was tired, his body aching from the crash, his mind wired with the tension of the coming day. Ava turned to look at him. Her gaze traveled over his chest, tracing the map of his life written in scars. There was a jagged line on his ribs from a knife fight when he was 20, a circular burn on his shoulder. He was a tapestry of violence, yet standing there in the dim light, he looked incredibly vulnerable. You should sleep, Nico said softly. Tomorrow will be hard. I cannot sleep, Ava replied. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the glass breaking. Nico crossed the room. He stopped a foot away from her. The air between them crackled, charged with the knowledge that this might be their last night on Earth. If the sting went wrong, if a bullet found its mark. He stepped closer, crowding her gently until her back pressed against the cool wall beside the window. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just stood there, breathing her in, letting his presence wrap around her. "I'm sorry," Nico murmured. "I promised you safety. I brought you a war. You brought me a life," Ava corrected. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the faint white scar on his pectoral muscle. "You saved me, Nico." His breath hitched at her touch. He leaned his forehead down, resting it against hers. His eyes slipped shut. "I dragged you out of the water," he whispered. "That is all I did." Ava moved her hand up, her palm resting flat against his heart. She could feel it beating, strong, steady, a rhythm she had come to rely on. "No," she whispered. "You stayed. You held on." Nico opened his eyes. They were dark pools of emotion. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes, searching for permission, searching for doubt. He shifted his hands from the wall, bringing them down to cradle her face. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, his touch reverent, as if she were something holy that he was afraid to break. "Ava," he breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the storm, desperate and frightened. This was slow. It was a question and a promise. His lips moved over hers with a deliberate tenderness that made her knees weak. He tasted of scotch and mint. Ava sighed into his mouth, her hands sliding up his bare chest to wrap around his neck, her fingers tangling in the dark hair at the nape of his neck. She pulled him closer, eliminating the space between them. Nico made a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss. His restraint began to fracture. His hands slid down from her face to her waist, gripping her hips, pulling her flesh against him. The heat of his skin burned through her thin blouse. She felt the hardness of his muscles, the power he was holding in check. He kissed her jaw, the sensitive spot below her ear, the curve of her neck. Ava arched into him, a soft gasp escaping her lips. "Nico, please," she whispered. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing. He looked at the bed, then back at her. He wanted her. He wanted to lose himself in her, to claim her in the most primal way possible before the world tried to tear them apart again. He took her hand and led her to the bed. They sat down on the edge, the mattress dipping under their weight. Nico reached for the buttons of her blouse, his fingers trembling slightly. But then he stopped. He looked at her. Really looked at her. She was beautiful. Yes. But she was also the woman he had pulled from the ocean. She was the woman who had trusted him when she should have run. He dropped his hands. "I cannot," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ava blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because if I take you tonight," Nico said, resting his forehead against hers again, "I will not be able to walk away from you tomorrow, and I need to be able to walk away to save you." He pulled back to look her in the eye. "Tell me, Ava, is this real, or are you just clinging to the person who saved you? Because if this is gratitude, if this is trauma, I cannot do this. I cannot be another man taking advantage of your fear." Ava reached up, cupping his face. She ran her thumb over his lower lip. "I am not in love with the man in the water anymore," she whispered, her voice clear and certain in the quiet room. "I am in love with the man who is sitting here, the man who protects me, the man who listens." She leaned in and kissed him softly. "I love you, Nico." The words seemed to break something open inside him, the tension drained from his shoulders, replaced by a profound, aching relief. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her down onto the bed. They didn't undress. They didn't have sex. It felt too small, too ordinary for what they were feeling. Instead, they lay tangled together, fully clothed, limbs entwined. Nico pulled the duvet over them. He held her against his chest, his arm draped over her waist, his hand resting flat over her heart. Ava buried her face in the crook of his neck, breathing in his scent. They lay there in the dark, sharing slow, lingering kisses, brushing their noses together, murmuring quiet reassurances. It was the most intimate moment of Nico's life, to hold her without taking, to be held without demanding. "If we make it through tomorrow," Nico whispered into the darkness, his lips brushing her ear, "I am taking you away from here, somewhere where the ocean is calm." "We will make it," Ava whispered back, tightening her grip on him, Just hold on to me. I'm never letting go," Nico promised. The Harborview docks smelled of diesel, rotting wood, and impending violence. The sky was a bruised purple, the remnants of the storm still hanging low. Containers were stacked like colorful monoliths, creating a maze of steel canyons. Nico's black SUV idled near the edge of Pier 4. "Are you ready?" Nico asked. Looking at Ava, she nodded. She was wearing a simple gray coat. Her wrists were bound in front of her with zip ties, but Nico had left them loose enough that she could snap them if she twisted her wrists hard enough, a trick he had taught her that morning. "Remember," Nico said, his eyes scanning the perimeter, "stay behind me. When the shooting starts, you drop to the ground and you do not move until Leo gets to you." "I know," Ava said. They stepped out of the car. Victor Kane was waiting at the end of the pier, flanked by 6 of his men. He was a tall man with a cruelty etched into his face that money and suits couldn't hide. Beside him stood Eric, looking like he wanted to vomit. Nico placed a hand on Ava's arm and guided her forward. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She felt exposed, terrified, but she kept her head high. "Romano!" Victor called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the water lapping against the pilings. "You actually came, and you brought my package." Nico stopped 10 yards away. "I am here to end this." "Victor," Nico shouted back. "You want the girl? Here she is. You want the territory? We can talk. But the attacks stopped today." Victor laughed. It was a dry, scratching sound. "You've gone soft, Nico. Falling for the drowning girl. It is embarrassing." He gestured to Eric. "Look at him, your ex-boyfriend. He knew when to fold. He knew his place. But you, Nico, you always thought you were better than us." Victor stepped forward, closing the distance. He stopped in front of Ava. He looked her up and down with a sneer. "She does not look like much." Victor scoffed. "A bartender. A nobody. All this trouble for a piece of driftwood." Nico's body went rigid. His hand twitched at his side. Victor reached out and grabbed Ava's chin, his fingers digging into her jaw. He forced her head up. "Look at me, darling," Victor taunted. "Tell me, was he worth it?" Ava stared at him, her heart pounding. But she didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eye. "He's worth 10 of you," she said clearly. Victor's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand as if to strike her. "Touch her again," Nico said, his voice dropping to a temperature that froze the air. "And I will kill you where you stand. Deal or no deal." Victor froze. He looked at Nico, seeing the absolute, unhinged violence waiting behind his eyes. He dropped his hand and stepped back, a smirk playing on his lips. "You know," Victor said casually, adjusting his cufflinks, "I almost believed you. The great Nico Romano, surrendering for love. It is a beautiful story." He paused, his eyes gleaming with malice. "It is a shame about the Fed." Though Nico's blood ran cold. "What?" Victor chuckled. "You didn't think I had friends in the Bureau? My mole tells me Agent Lawson is setting up a perimeter right now." He pointed to a stack of crates to the east. "Snipers in the crane. Strike team in the container. Very clever, Nico, but predictable." Eric let out a whimper. Victor pulled a gun from his waistband. "Grab the girl!" Victor shouted to his men. "Shoot him!" Chaos erupted instantly. Victor lunged for Ava. Nico moved faster than thought. He shoved Ava backward, putting himself in the line of fire. "Run!" Nico roared. A gunshot cracked him through the air, echoing off the water. Then another. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Ava scrambled back, tripping over a coil of rope. She looked up to see Nico drawing his weapon, firing 2 shots that dropped one of Victor's men, but they were outnumbered. Victor had his gun raised, aiming squarely at Nico's chest. "Nico!" Ava screamed. The sky opened up, rain beginning to pour again, turning the dock slick and deadly. Shadows raced across the storm-darkened water as Maya's team burst from cover, but they were too far away. The trap had failed, the negotiation was over, and the final battle for survival had begun. The sky tore open as if the heavens themselves had declared war. The rain did not start as a drizzle. It fell in a torrential sheet, instantly turning the weathered wood of the dock into a slick, treacherous surface. The visibility dropped to 0 in seconds, a gray curtain of water that blurred the lines between the shipping containers and the churning sea. Gunfire erupted from the east side of the pier. Maya's team, blinded by the sudden downpour, was forced to break cover early. Muzzle flashes strobed in the gloom, orange bursts of light that illuminated the chaos. The sound was deafening, the crack of pistols, the roar of the thunder, and the relentless hammering of the rain against metal. Nico moved through the storm like a wraith. A bullet had grazed his left shoulder, tearing through his jacket and shirt, leaving a trail of fire across his skin, but he barely felt it. His entire world had narrowed down to the single, terrifying sight of Victor Kane dragging Ava backward. Victor had his arm hooked around Ava's throat, his body pressed tight against hers, using her as a human shield. He was moving toward a sleek black speedboat idling at the end of the pier, its engine roaring over the sound of the waves. "Let her go!" Nico screamed. His voice raw. He raised his weapon, but he could not fire. Victor was too close to her. One mistake, one slip on the wet wood, and the bullet would find Ava instead of the monster holding her. Victor laughed, a manic sound lost in the wind. He dragged Ava another 5 feet, his heels slipping on the slime-coated planks. "You want her?" Victor shouted. "Come and get her, Romano, or watch her disappear forever." Ava clawed at Victor's arm, her fingernails digging into the expensive fabric of his suit, but his grip was iron. The cold rain plastered her hair to her face, blinding her. She could feel the vibration of the speedboat's engine in the planks under her feet. She could smell the exhaust fumes mixing with the brine of the ocean, and she could hear the water. Below the edge of the dock, the sea was raging. It crashed against the pilings with a hungry, rhythmic boom. The sound triggered a primal panic in Ava's chest, the memory of the freezing cold, the salt water filling her lungs, the darkness swallowing her whole. It all came rushing back, paralyzing her. She was going to drown. He was going to take her on that boat and throw her back into the abyss. She looked up, searching desperately through the rain. She saw Nico. He was 20 feet away, moving forward in a crouch, his face twisted in a mask of pure terror. Leo was beside him, providing cover fire, but Nico's eyes were locked on hers. In that split second across the chaotic distance, Ava saw the reflection of her own fear. He was remembering the night he found her. He was remembering the girl floating in the black waves. "Hold on to me, Ava!" Nico roared over the wind, his voice cutting through the gunfire. "You hear me? Hold on to me." The words hit her like a physical blow. It was their command. It was the promise that had kept her alive in the clinic, in the mansion, and in the cabin. Victor jerked her backward, his foot hitting the cleat of the boat. "Get in the boat!" he snarled in her ear. Ava looked at the dark water churning below. Then she looked at the gap between 2 large shipping crates to her left. It was a narrow space, filled with debris, but it was solid ground. She made a choice. She would not be a victim again. She would not be dragged away. As Victor shifted his weight to step onto the gunwale of the boat, Ava stopped fighting his arm. Instead, she went dead weight for a fraction of a second, throwing him off balance. Then, with a scream of effort, she twisted her body violently to the left. She did not pull away from him. She threw herself sideways. Victor lost his grip on her wet coat. Ava slammed hard onto the wooden planks, skidding toward the gap between the crates. Her shoulder hit the wood with a sickening thud, sending a shockwave of pain down her arm, but she scrambled forward, clawing at the wet timber, dragging herself away from the edge. Nico saw the opening. He didn't run. He launched himself, ignoring the bullets pinging off the metal container beside him, ignoring the blood soaking his shirt. Nico tackled Victor Kane just as the other man raised his gun to shoot Ava. The 2 men hit the deck with a bone-jarring impact. They rolled across the slick surface, a tangle of limbs and fury. Victor was strong, fueled by desperation, but Nico was fighting with the rage of a man protecting his soul. Nico slammed his fist into Victor's jaw, once, twice. Victor bucked, throwing Nico off, and scrambled for his dropped weapon. Nico lunged, grabbing Victor's ankle, dragging him back. Victor kicked out, his boot connecting with Nico's injured shoulder. Nico grunted, vision graying for a second, but he didn't let go. Victor rolled onto his back, his hand closing around the grip of his pistol. He raised it, aiming directly at Nico's chest. "Die!" Victor screamed. Nico braced himself for the impact. Crack! A single shot rang out, sharper and cleaner than the chaotic gunfire around them. Victor's hand exploded in a spray of red. He shrieked, the gun clattering from his useless fingers and sliding over the edge of the dock into the water. 50 yards away, atop a container crane, one of Maya's snipers cycled the bolt of his rifle. Law enforcement swarmed the pier. Agents in tactical gear moved in. Weapons drawn. Victor, clutching his shattered wrist, tried to crawl toward the boat, but Leo was there. Leo kicked Victor flat onto the wood, pressing the barrel of his gun to the back of the syndicate leader's head. "Stay down," Leo growled. It was over. Nico scrambled to his knees, his chest heaving. "Ava!" He looked toward the crates where she had thrown herself. Ava was trying to stand. She was dizzy, disoriented by the fall and the adrenaline dump. She pushed herself up near the edge of the pier. Her boots finding no purchase on the slime-coated wood, she slipped. It happened in slow motion. One moment she was standing, the next, her feet slid out from under her. She flailed, her arms reaching for something, anything, but there was nothing but rain and air. She fell backward, over the side of the dock. "Ava!" The scream tore from Nico's throat. He didn't think, he didn't assess the distance. He sprinted. He threw himself flat onto the wet wood, sliding on his stomach, diving toward the edge just as she disappeared. He reached down into the void. His hand closed around a wrist. The jolt nearly dislocated his shoulder. Nico slammed into the edge of the dock, his chest hanging over the abyss, the rough wood scraping the skin from his ribs. Below him, Ava dangled over the churning black waves. Her other hand scrambled for a grip on his forearm, her wet fingers slipping on his skin. The ocean roared beneath her, hungry and violent, frothing around the pilings. "Don't let go," she sobbed, looking down at the water that had haunted her nightmares. "I have you," Nico roared, his face red with strain. His muscles shook violently. The rain lashed at his eyes, blinding him. He tightened his grip until he felt the bones of her wrist, anchoring her to the world. "I am not letting go," Nico shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. "Not this time, not ever." He pulled, he gritted his teeth, finding a reserve of strength born of pure love, and he hauled her up. Leo and Maya appeared beside him. Hands grabbed his belt. Hands grabbed Ava's jacket. Together, they heaved them backward. Ava came over the edge, collapsing onto the solid wood of the dock. Nico rolled onto his back, pulling her on top of him. They lay there in the pouring rain, soaked, bleeding and shaking uncontrollable. Ava buried her face in his neck, sobbing, her hands clutching his shirt. Nico wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him, rocking her slightly as the adrenaline crashed through his system. "I have got you," he whispered into her wet hair, over and over again like a prayer. "I have got you." The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. Medics swarmed the dock. Victor Kane was handcuffed and shoved into the back of a federal vehicle, screaming curses at the sky. His empire was dismantled in minutes, his men surrendering as the tactical teams moved in. Eric Dalton was found crouching behind a crate, weeping. When Maya approached him, he babbled a confession before she could even read him his rights. He agreed to testify against Victor in exchange for protective custody, desperate to escape the consequences of his own cowardice. Nico sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders. Ava sat beside him, wrapped in an identical blanket. Her hand was gripped tightly in his. She refused to let go, and he refused to ask her to. Maya approached them. She looked tired, her windbreaker soaked, but she looked satisfied. "It is done," Maya said. "We have the recording. We have Eric. We have Victor. The Black Harbor Syndicate is finished." She looked at Nico. "Now about you." Nico stood up. He winced slightly as the movement pulled at his bandaged shoulder. "We had a deal." "Maya," Nico said. Maya nodded. "You provide full documentation on the Romano family's smuggling routes. You dismantle the enforcement arm of your organization. You pay restitution. In exchange, The DOJ drops the racketeering charges and agrees to a probationary period. And Ava? Nico asked. Maya looked at the woman sitting on the ambulance. She's in the clear. We will frame her involvement as a confidential informant. Her record stays clean. Nico looked down at Ava. He squeezed her hand. Do it, Nico said. I am done with this life. Maya raised an eyebrow. You are giving up an empire. Nico looked at the ocean, then back at Ava. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead. I tried to build an empire on fear, Nico said quietly. It was cold. I would rather build a life on something that keeps me warm. 6 weeks later, the house was small. It was a white cottage with blue shutters, perched on a gentle hill overlooking a bay 50 miles south of Harborview. The water here was different. It was a calm, turquoise blue that lapped gently against a stretch of white sand. There were no guards at the gate. There were no cameras in the trees. Nico Romano stood on the back porch, leaning against the railing. He was not wearing a suit. He wore faded jeans and a gray t-shirt, his sleeves rolled up to expose his forearms. He held 2 glasses of lemonade. He watched the woman standing on the beach below. Ava had her camera on a tripod. She was photographing the sunset. For weeks, she'd been unable to look at the water without panicking. But slowly, day by day, she had returned to it. She was capturing the light hitting the waves, reclaiming the beauty of the thing that had almost destroyed her. She looked up and waved at him. Nico walked down the wooden stairs to the sand. He handed her a glass. Did you get the shot? He asked. Ava smiled, pushing her wind-blown hair back. I think so. The light is perfect today. She took a sip of the lemonade and looked out at the horizon. It is so quiet here. Do you miss the noise? Nico asked. Ava shook her head. Never. She set the glass down on a piece of driftwood and turned to him. She reached out, tracing the line of his jaw, the tension that used to live there finally gone. Come walk with me, she said. They walked barefoot along the water's edge. The sand was cool and wet between their toes. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange. Ava stumbled slightly on a shell, losing her balance. Before she could even gasp, Nico's arm was around her waist. He caught her effortlessly, pulling her back against his chest. Reflex, he murmured, his lips close to her ear. Ava laughed, turning in his arms to face him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, looking up at him. The fear that used to shadow her eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce, steady love. You are always catching me, she whispered. Nico looked down at her. The rugged lines of his face softened. He rested his hands on her hips, swaying her gently with the rhythm of the small waves hissing nearby. I spent 30 years waiting for something worth catching, Nico said, his voice rough with emotion. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. The ocean does not scare me anymore, Ava whispered, closing her eyes, because the worst night of my life brought me to you. If I had to drown to find you, Nico, I would do it again. Nico closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. He tightened his hold on her, anchoring her to him, anchoring himself to this new, peaceful life. You never have to drown again. He promised. I will spend the rest of my life proving that dragging you out of that sea was the first right thing I ever did. He tilted her head back and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of salt air and sweet lemonade, of redemption and peace. As the sun vanished and the first stars appeared over the calm water, they stood there on the shore, holding on to each other. The storm had passed, the darkness had receded, and in its place was a future they had chosen, hand in hand, safe on the solid ground. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the storm, from the dark waters of Harborview to the peaceful shores of redemption. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of Nico and Ava's story. Did the ending bring you the peace you were hoping for? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of danger, passion, and love that conquers the darkest odds. Don't forget to share your thoughts in English in the comments section. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe and keep holding on to the ones you love.